November 15th, 1953. Tom was taken ill with polio and was in the hospital for 3 months. He was severely affected in his right leg and must be exercised twice a day. However, with his usual wonderful disposition, he has come through this better than his parents. We must all learn to live with this and, on the whole, have been okay, but there have been some bad moments. At that time, in 53, I was 8 years old. I was running races in the back of the schoolyard with friends, and I kept on falling down. And then I went to the nurse, and I had a bad headache, and I went home with a headache. My mom picked me up, and every time I lifted my head up in bed, it hurt like the devil. And she called our family doctor. He came out to the house, and he thought I had what they called grip, which was, kind of a viral cold or something like that. And it got worse and worse, and began having breathing issues and pain in my body and so forth. So they took me to Fetterman Hospital in Center City. There, they put me in a children's ward. They didn't really know what I had. They thought I had spinal meningitis. In fact, they treated me. They gave me a spinal tap, and that wasn't definitive. And then they started giving me these big honker penicillin shots every 2 hours, day and night for 2 weeks. And to this day, I'm not very fond of injections. I knew something was wrong because I was very thirsty. So I climbed out of bed, and my legs just crumpled underneath me, and I ended up on the floor and stayed there for a while until they did their rounds and found me there. And then they finally got the diagnosis. I had polio. They sent me off to Norristown, to Montgomery Hospital, where they have isolation ward. And they put me in a glass room. There I lay on this stretcher, basically. And on the stretcher, it's like my whole body had rigor mortis. I was completely stiff, like a board. I couldn't lift my head up. I couldn't move my arms, legs, anything. And it was, 8 years old. I'm thinking, what the heck is this? It was a little worrisome, I thought something serious is going on. And then I noticed my parents, they would come, but they were not allowed in. They had to stand outside in a gown and look at me and all this stuff. And anything that I owned, they told me they burnt everything, all my clothes, all my books, all my toys, everything. So I was traveling light. And then after a couple of weeks, the virus had peaked and I was no longer virulent. So they then moved me to Sacred Heart Hospital in Norristown, which is a Catholic hospital. But they had nuns there, and they were the nurses. And I was not a Catholic, so I wasn't really intimate with nuns and interacting with them. But it turned out they were terrific people, and they took very good care of us all. But when I first got there, I was still having trouble with breathing. And so that's when they put me in an iron lung. And I wasn't there for long. I was only in there for a couple of weeks. It was frightening, but I was taken out and manipulated, my body, stretched. So I was rigid when I went in. When you get polio, it affects your whole body. It might hone in on a particular place, but I didn't have bulbar polio, which is the one that really is the tough one. But I had trouble breathing. I remember that, shortness of breath. And that was without running around or anything. I was just laying there to get shortness. I wasn't in there 24/7, but I was in there a lot, especially the first week. It was kind of soothing. That's my memory of it, because it just pushed and pulled. It pushed and pulled and pushed and pulled atmospherically. So it was all over your whole body at the same time. It was actually kind of relaxing, a little hypnotic. And once you got used to that sucking and blowing sound, it was kind of reassuring. Well, I guess I'm still breathing. That's a good thing. I did better there in the iron lung than I did on the rocker bed, this bed that I just was strapped onto, and it would very slowly go back and forth and I guess, push the weight against my diaphragm and lift the weight off the diaphragm. And that would be the sleep aid, I guess it was. And that went on for way too long, in my opinion. I mean, I had a hard time sleeping and was not relaxed at all. And they had these drawl shades that came down and covered the complete window, blackout shades, kind of. I remember that only until I saw the little crack of light at the very bottom when I knew the sun was coming up. As soon as I saw that, bam, I was asleep. I could relax for a minute. It wasn't the dark. I'm not afraid. I'm just going to take a little nap and I'd be out for a while, But the iron lung itself, my recollection was it was actually kind of calming. It wasn't the only iron lung there. And the iron lung next to me was this lovely adult woman. She had 3 children and she lay there and she could speak and I could speak. Our heads are kind of sticking out and she was very maternal toward me, which was quite amazing. She was in there the whole 3 months that I was there. And her husband and her 3 kids, little toddlers, would come every day and she would lay there and look at the mirror above her and talk to them. For me, it was a very rude awakening for an 8-year-old to realize our fragility and how we kind of go along with life thinking everything's going to be perfect forever and ever. And I learned at a very early age that just ain't so, and I realized the value of being as well off as I was. After a couple of weeks, they kept on checking on me and they checked my vitals, I'm supposing, every day and have a breathing thing to see how well I'm breathing. And they moved me out finally of the iron lung. By that time, I had became quite worried about the physical aspect of my body and what was going on. I could move my head by then and I could move my arms a little bit. But anyway, after a couple of weeks, they put me into a regular bed with another lad from Norristown, Wesley Davis. He and I were about the same age and about the same affliction. And we became quite good friends. The care, I was treated with the Sister Kenny method, which is the nurse from Australia who came up with this method of putting steaming hot wool pads around your limbs. And then once they got you warmed up, Miss Van Horn, lovely woman, Softic German eyeglasses with the beads here to pick it up, half frames. But she was a very sweet but no nonsense person, and she would stretch you, she'd put you into these amazingly painful places. And that's one thing I remember was everybody would scream out because it hurt, and she would do one at a time down the hallway. And they had this thing with the hot blankets, hot pads in it. They'd roll down and they'd plug into each room. You'd lay there and hear this progression of screams getting closer and closer and closer, and then finally it was your turn to scream, It limbered up the joints. Everything is stiff, like I said, like a board, and very little, slowly, they made you bend a little bit further each day, and it worked. And we all became limber, in the end. And that was very great. It gave us more mobility, and we had a great deal of fun. Wesley and I, we would go up the elevator and feed the monkeys they had in the science department. And they took us on trips. There's a little zoo up in Norristown there. Then eventually started swimming therapy at the Norristown YMCA. We'd go there and swim. I mean, it was like a family in there. I was lucky to have people around in the same situation because we all shared that stuff. And I think that made it easier on everybody. At least it did for me. The nuns, they made a leg brace for me. And then I had wooden Kenny crutches, armband crutches. And they took me into the rehab room and they had gym mats on the floor. And they'd get me walking around and doing all this stuff. And after I got pretty good at it, they would sneak up behind me and they would kick a crutch out from underneath me. And I would go down to the ground. And they did that innumerable times to teach me how to fall. And to this day, I still have all my teeth. I mean, I've calculated I've fallen probably more than 500 times in my life. So you better learn how to do that, or else you'll be in bad shape, you know? My mom and dad were absolute troopers. I mean, they drove, I mean, he lived 45 minutes away, and they visited me every single day for that whole time I was in the hospital. One day, they had not one, but two flat tires. And so there was no spare, and they called up, so sorry, we can't make it. And, you know, I might have even been relieved to have a break there for a minute. I don't know. I mean, they were very, very caring, and I have wonderful family. I have two brothers, and they would visit, and then I had friends that would come and visit that my mom would drag along. And for me, it was like the first experience away from home, and my first traveling experience. And initially I was afraid, but after I kind of got a hold of what was going on and realized I was meeting all these wonderful, supportive people, and the parents of all the people that came to visit the children were wonderful, and they would visit everybody. And it was really quite amazing. And at the same time, my community where I grew up was very generous. And they would send me these cards, like a train had dimes in the wheels, of the quarters in the engine, and they built a little HO thing for me for my bed. It was really quite an outpouring. And I think it was because I statistically took the place of maybe their child, you know, and they realized that it could have been anybody. I was kind of mandated to be kind of heroic, even though I didn't necessarily feel so, but it became obvious that that was the response. They wanted a stiff upper lip. They wanted a smiling guy, and I'll be all right. Don't worry about me. And so I kind of rose to the occasion, and I was, you know, and continue to be, you know, upbeat and personal and so forth. In the beginning, when they burned everything, they burnt my Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett coonskin hat, you know, which was a big rage then. Davy Crockett was like on everything, Fess Parker. And then years ago, I sold a patent of mine to a medical company, and they wanted me to come to California to demonstrate it. And it was in Santa Barbara, where Fess Parker owns the Red Lion Hotel or something like that. And all the people that I was associated with were getting their picture taken with Fess Parker. After that was done, he was walking back to go in the hotel. I walked up next to him and I started singing one of his songs as they walked by, and he kind of stopped and he finished the song, you know, which was great. We sat down and we talked, and I told him about the polio and the coonskin cap and all that stuff. And then 2 days after I got home, I got a box, and it had coonskin cap signed by Fess Parker, Daniel Boone, and all that kind of stuff. So it was a sweet ending to a lovely experience. I missed 3 months of school. And back then, they let me go back to my class. They thought it was important that I stay with my peers and forget what I didn't. And I still to this day can't read Roman numerals. I miss that. Of course, the schools, they were not at all handicap accessible. I had not learned yet how to go up and down stairs. So here I am in this classroom, and the next class I had to go upstairs for. So the teachers were good enough to let me out 5 minutes early from class so I could struggle up those steps. And in the beginning, I went up on my butt. You know, I sat down on the second step, and then I pushed myself up, then take the crutches and take them up a step, and went to the next one. Within a week, I was walking up and down steps. After a couple, 3 months, my upper body kicked in. I developed musculature, and I was doing 2 steps at a time on my crutches. I mean, the school was an important part of the acceptance thing. I mean, it was a small school. These are friends before, during, and after, and that was fortunate. I do remember that when the first sugar cube dose came out, I was in junior high school. I was probably 13. And I remember asking the doc, what are the chances of me getting polio again? He said, oh, he said, probably like 1 in a million. I said, give me that sugar cube. So I got vaccinated. I mean, I wasn't going to take any chances. We don't need to do this again. Now I look back on my whole life with a disability, and I really think, I mean, this sounds a little weird, but next to my lovely wife and daughter, and now granddaughter, polio was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it drew me out. It gave me a very optimistic feeling about people, and also a great sense of adventure, because I was no longer afraid to go places. And when I was 18 or 19, I realized that I had a limited amount of mobility in my life. And I was strong now. I'm not going to be strong forever. So let's get it on. And as a consequence, my wife and I have lived all over the world, in India, and Bali, Indonesia, and Greece, and we've been around the world 4 times. I've climbed Borobudur, I've climbed the Acropolis twice, from Germany to India overland back in the 70s, 6 months on the road. I've done all this stuff. I don't think I would have done any of that if I hadn't had polio. I really don't. And now I've gotten into this business of designing crutches and these crutch tips, and I've sold more than 1 million crutch tips, so actually financially it's paid off as well. And I've got over 15,000 clients. This group of disabled people are the most amazing people. It's just remarkable to me how people thrive under adversity.